Yarnam was a beautiful town, old and regal, appearing like a garden of castles. Maria adored how it had grown upon itself through countless ages, and supposedly been through so much. Further down the slopes she could see life going about its simple pace, as she was about to discover things that could very well cause it to change, be it drastically or only slightly. The possibilities were endless within the old labyrinth. A startling thought, to be sure. She departed from her daydreams to the dawdling scholars. Much time had been put into setting up tents and tables, placing equipment upon said tables, creating groups and individually organizing the research. It was blatantly a delay out of both fear and veneration for the greatness ahead. German walked up to the opening and waved for her to join him. He had gathered up their apprentices, their guardians, who would naturally be heading in first to ensure that their previous visit had rendered the chambers truly vacant. Lawrence too stood at his side. Right. He nodded and looked them over, one by one. Nothing much to think about. We all know it, and we know how to adapt. Whatever comes, we handle it. But it is for real this time around. Do not let the circumstances sway you, but do not forget to give the respect it demands. Good talk, Gammon. Lawrence ensued his own briefing. The operation as a whole looks like this. German, Maria, Shepard and Vitus will enter first. This will be the scouting party. You will not leave your position until the first research party has arrived at your location. Cromley, Millard, Pius and Foster will escort said researchers down soon after, and will continue to act as escorts. Worry not, all the scholars present will not delve down, only a minority. We will likely need to set up stations within the actual ruin, but that operation will be explained in due time. Questions so far? All the guardians were silent. There was no fear on their faces, but a tenseness, a bravenness. She had no doubt they would do good, nor did she think they had doubts of their own. Unlike the scholars who took their good time thinking and preparing, there was not much they could do but to act. All right, I will assemble my team and give you the clear when the scouts can enter. He left them and joined the scholars, currently being given their own engaging speech by a wild-eyed Willem. Nervous? Maria asked, and they shook their heads, but in a fashion that made them look rather tense. Good. Makes you serious. Stay together. Look out for one another. Look after your wards. Not much else to think about in there. Hey! Lawrence picked up and waved at them, then raised his thumb in the air. That's the mark. German waved back at him. Gear up. You. He pointed to the four that would remain behind. Take your gear and wait at the exit. Do not enter without the scholars. 2 in front, 2 in the back. They nodded. The 4 members of the scouting party stepped down the slope to the arching entrance. Next to it was a table with their weapons. Maria grabbed her sidearm and the rakuyo. German slung the folded handle on his back, took the blade in his right hand and a rifle in his left, and lastly lit a small lantern that he hung on his belt. Vitus and Shepard rested the cutters over their shoulders, holstered their pistols in their chest strap, and took a torch in their free hand. Right. He nodded inward, and so they stepped through. Down the familiar spiral, into the chamber and further into the four-way hall. The team of four stood still in the dark chamber, listening. Something that sounded like a dog attempting to whisper like a human was heard from beyond. Maria had more than once contemplated how far the sounds traveled to reach them, and how loud they must be at their origin. So far safe. Maria, Vitus, check the right hallway. I and Shepard take the forward. Do not advance, only scout. Got it. She broke off from the team with Vitus right after. There was a long, utterly dark corridor that was made more eerie by the torchlight. Roots had penetrated the arching ceiling in some places. They entered into a well-lit chamber where pillars supported walkways above them and along the opposite wall. A ladder allowed access to the platform diagonally across the room from the corner they emerged from. Similarly to before, they waited silently, hearing nothing significant except for the mysterious sounds from beyond. There was one corridor on the opposite corner from where they entered. She was aware it led into two more chambers, where she had practiced with the group before. Up above, there were two more doorways, one leading into a gargantuan chamber, the other she did not know. I'll scout above. Check down that way. She pointed towards the corner while making her way towards the ladder. She climbed up and threw just a peek above. While still on the ladder, she attentively listened for any nearby sounds. There was none. Upon meeting back with Vitus, he shook his head and he turned away from the archway. She nodded and began her way back towards the initial four-way chamber. She sent Vitus back up to give the clear, and in short, the chamber was beginning to be illuminated by the arriving scholars. They emerged to meet Cromley and Foster leading the pack. Following was Lawrence and a team of scholars, all carrying cumbersome inventory of tools and instruments of research. In the back came Carol, who was tightly clutched to Millard's left arm, looking nervously around the place. My! Oh, look at these statues! Master Doris exclaimed and moved towards the feminine statues, accompanied by an equally amazed Karsten. What is it that lights them? Such a strange glow. German and Shepard came through the other corridor, apparently not encountering anything either. So, what do we have? Lawrence looked in turn to her and German. Safe down yonder. Nothing over there as well. German pointed behind through the corridor. Well, I meant more... What is that? She raised an eyebrow to German as they exchanged a look. Uh-huh. Well, there is a large cart further down. But you'll just have to decide on one for now. Lawrence nodded and turned back over his shoulder to the group. Yes. Perhaps we should stay as one unit. Can those bars be opened? German shook his head. Let's gander on your path then, Gammon. Doris approached. Might we spare some time to move down some equipment? We will likely not be in a position to move many objects up above. Lawrence looked to German, who pointed at Cromley and Foster. You stay. Everyone else comes along. He turned and moved into the hallway once more, Maria and Vitus directly after. Behind them came Lawrence, Luna, Master Valar, and Carol, still attached to Millard. Once through, German stopped abruptly. She peeked behind his tall shoulder into the large hall with a second level further in to see how a hooded figure came walking up at the landing of the stair. It was holding a lantern and a tool resembling a sickle. It slowly but determinedly walked down and out on the walkway running between the two stairs, right below the edge of the elevation. There it turned to them and watched. After a strange moment of silence, it raised the lantern and, like a bell, chimed it back and forth, producing a loud clanging sound, as if it were an actual bell. As the sound resonated in the chamber, additional silhouettes came walking up by the stairs and the edge of the second floor. The starved, naked visages of men with sickly pale skin and red discoloration on their bodies, their mouths agape and eyes so dark one would think they simply did not have any. They suddenly started running down the stairs, flooding the room. German jumped out of the doorway right into the center of the room, with Maria close behind him. Most heads were now directed either on her or him. Vitus and Shepard were not far behind. Their steps were heard to move into separate corners along the entry wall, and soon their cutters were in full swing. German slammed the blade into the hilt on the back, tossed the scythe over his shoulder and reached directly towards the holder of the lantern. He pulled the lanky body down to them by reaching around the body with the blade. Maria leapt to the side of him to plunge the short end of her blade straight into the chest of an approaching figure. It made a gasping sigh when she retracted it, turned and sliced with a long end while backing up. The blow threw the figure to the floor, almost spinning around fully in the fall. Behind the creature came another of its ranks, but was quickly sent staggered backwards as the whipped form of Shepard's cutter was flung into it. She started running up the stairs, simultaneously separating the blades, and met one of the labyrinth horrors by thrusting both ends into its chest, producing abnormally little blood from its wounds. Not surprising, as they were more akin to skeletons than living humanoids. With a long saber still thrust into its body, she retrieved the smaller from its chest and sliced 2 times at the neck. It reached up with its hands to clutch at a meekly gushing wound before falling backwards off her saber. It unnerved her how little sound they produced. One would think screams of pain would be worse, but she was not in agreement. She continued up to see another on the other side, by the beginning of the secondary descent. From below, Shepard came running behind her. She fired a bullet at the figure, and he sprinted past with a cutter over his shoulder. While briefly stunned, he swung the hunk of iron over its head, followed up with transitioning it into a second attack by following the weapon's weight and swinging back again. The force sent the creature flying backwards, limply and dead. She examined her surroundings and calmed herself when no other of the labyrinth guardians still stood. Down below, Millard and Pius had covered the entry, standing ward over the scholars. German looked up at her. "How's it up there?" "Nothing." She began walking down. The rest of the group now started to emerge excitedly behind the two guards in the doorway, marveling at the grotesque carcasses of the labyrinth denizens. Carol jumped straight back onto Millard's shoulder, putting all effort on averting her eyes as much as possible. "What happened? I thought this place was cleared." Lawrence came up to German as Maria joined them. "They must have strayed inside from the deeper reaches." "On the bright side, the other chambers might be less inhabited now." She turned her eyes over to Carol. Unlike Luna, who was in the middle of extracting samples of various nature and placing them in vials enthusiastically, she stood wavering in reluctant observance. Maria thought to comfort her, but noticed it might not be needed, as seen on how she clutched Millard's hand. Since it had been noticed before of her friend's squeamishness and the subsequent search for comfort, she did not think more of it when Millard started guiding her by the hand deeper inside the room. "Come now, you have a job to do." She lingered at the sight of the deceased, nodded her head and swallowed her fears right before Millard turned his chin up towards German. "Hey German, will you help us take a look upstairs?" While he departed after them, Master Doris suddenly came strolling through the corridor opening and shot a grimace in the direction of the mess produced from earlier. He came up to Lawrence and Maria where they stood in the center. My. He admired the chamber from the ceiling to the walls. "Well, yes, we have occupied the chamber, but perhaps we would need a secondary station." Lawrence, too, looked around the chamber, less in awe and more in concern. Maria felt solely concern. "I suppose," Lawrence finally murmured after a delayed silence. "Is it truly necessary, Master, to occupy every room?" "Well, it is likely so. Just look around and imagine the things yet to see." She tilted her head back and forth in slight bother. "Oh, I know, but please, wait until we have assessed everything. I'll scout further ahead and return. Then you can start expanding when it's truly safe." Doris looked as if caught sleeping at his desk when he turned to face her. Oh, of course. Sound reasoning. Very sound indeed. Seems I got ahead of myself." He smiled nervously and slowly waltzed back towards the corridor he came through, still staring at the walls and decorations around the interior. She bumped Pius' shoulder and gave a motion for Vitus and Shepard to follow her up to the higher level. "We are heading out, German. Keep an eye on the chamber," she announced while still on her way up and with no visibility on him. He was leaning against the frame of the opening on the wall straight ahead from the stairs as they came up, looking inside. Carol stood with Millard at her side, taking notes while examining a pattern on a carved stone in the wall. It seemed odd to her that she had started right in the middle of the wall, as its entirety was covered with patterns and vague imagery. German finally acknowledged their arrival by turning his head. Eyes and ears sharp now. He turned to walk past them, heading to the stairs. Watch each other, he said in passing. Through the narrow, arched corridor that was about 15 feet or so long, they emerged directly into a new chamber, similar to the very first one with the four-way crossing and uninhabited by any undesirables. Down the left there is a dead-end corridor. Goes far but holds nothing, Vitus recalled from one of his practices. But no one has seen the other two. None of them seemed to know. Unlike other chambers that held a brighter atmosphere from candles, this was only lit up by their own torches. Such was part of the labyrinth's unpredictability. We go forward. She walked straight across, looking weary to the pitch-dark blackness of the other archways. As soon as she passed through into the other long corridor, she could discern a faint light at its end. Do you suppose those things are Thumerian descendants? Shepard's whispers sounded like a disembodied spectre in the foreboding dark approach. They act like no human, I mean. Since the first time, Shepard had been the one to keep remarkably quiet about his opinions. It caught her in some surprise when the burly man with a hardened face suddenly decided to speak up on the matter. We will find out. For now we can only preserve ourselves as we uncover the truth. But do you not have any guesses? I don't think so much of it. You can't just simply ask them. Yet they possess some form of self, it seems. Vitus added. She thought vexedly of how German would tell of the preciousness of life. She commonly thought admirably of it, but ceased to fully agree in regards to creatures that were undoubtedly hostile towards them. How he could show the slightest of care or opinion of beasts that wanted those she really cared for ill was beyond her. The light grew brighter until a decline presented itself. Steps leading down to a closed door with candlescones on its sides. It appeared wooden with fine carvings, but lacked a handle or hinges. It was a narrow space, as barely two persons could stand side to side in the stair. Maria descended first to examine the door. Careful! Could it be trapped? Shepard warned, enabling her to examine it more closely. It reached all the way up to the tall ceiling, and it lay firm and closed to the floor below. With the idea of a trap in mind, she placed a hand straight onto its surface. In the silence, she became aware of a sound from the other side. It did not sound very near, but undoubtedly originated from the room beyond. It was rhythmic and slow, as if someone was blowing air through something with even intervals. She felt around quietly on the door, tugging at the edges up and down until she placed her fingers at the very bottom crevice. It moved slightly. It felt awkward, but even so she locked out her knees and straightened her arms, then stood up, lifting the whole thing all the way over her head. She heard something click into place, and she carefully released her grip to find it now suspended where it was. The riches inside the chamber completely distracted her from the surprising workings of the door. Littered on the floor and in piles around the pillars of the chamber were golden and silver plates, vases, jugs, coins, jewelry and statues. But as with many treasures in the fairy tales, this one too had a guardian. Around the room, on the piles of golden ornaments and chests, lay more of the creatures from before. The room was much lower in roof, and had 3 pillars on each side that created arches in the ceiling. At the end of the chamber, standing in front of a large golden coffin, was a hulking creature, sporting a much fatter silhouette in comparison to his thick, thin associates, but shared their gaping dark mouths and black eyes with skin shining in the dim light of the candles. His garb looked as if it had been patched together from smaller articles in order for usage. He held a large lantern and a monstrous cudgel of metal. Gingerly she placed one foot through the door, then a second, equally as gingerly. Her eyes quickly darted from figure to figure that was littered amongst the treasures. She wondered briefly if the blob of a man could perceive her with those voided eyes, since he was unmoving and she produced next to no sound. His figure was eerily still, his attention absent, and his basal grunting breaths filled the room. Her third step was, however, enough, and he started to walk towards her, slightly hunched and cudgel at the ready. As he did, the emaciated figure started to rise in a choir of ghastly moans, voices long in disuse, only to be uttered in a meek breath. She leapt to the right, and past her flew Shepherd and Pious, aiming straight for the fat ghoul. To the left of the chamber came Vitus, straight onto one of them who had just stood up, only to be crushed back down. The room was no longer silent after the loud, clamoring crashes of the cutter and a cacophony of metal, ghostly voices and swooshing of objects through the air ensued. Out from behind the pillar closest to her came one of the pale and naked figures. It stumbled towards her, charging a blow with a wavy dagger held with both hands. It swung diagonally downwards, which she easily avoided by stepping to its side and past it. She cut the back of its head, which made it stumble forward a bit. Grabbing the handle with both hands, she stepped forward and brought down the dagger end into its back. She moved away out into the room to scan her surroundings. The brute was swinging wildly after Pious. Shepherd had been distracted from the fight and was currently warding off 2 garbed creatures, wielding flimsy spears. She drew her pistol, took aim and fired just as the brute was about to swing the cudgel back to the side. The impact was staggering, and it was thrown off balance utterly. Practically tossing the pistol back into its holster, she leapt forward and tore the dagger from the saber to plunge both into the kneeling thug. It still held firm of its weapon, and both blades pierced the abundant skin. She quickly withdrew it as it stood up again and swung the lantern at her. As she dodged backwards, Pius retaliated with a wide swipe to the neck. It turned its head away with the attack, towards Vitus, who delivered a devastating blow that audibly caused bones to break. The head turned nearly fully around on its shoulder, and it slowly leaned over, crashing loudly into a pile of the precious golden miscellaneous. She remained where she stood, breathing heavy and letting the fury of battle run its course. She stared at the body of the lumpy lantern holder. Blood had started to pool around it. "Have you noticed?" she said to no one in particular. "Huh?" "They bleed, but remain unflinching, only staggering by trauma sustained. They likely cannot feel pain." What are they? Were they people once? Or is this how they always have been? She shrugged and shook her head. "We should summon the others here." When the scholars appeared in the doorway, the protectors had taken their seats amongst the treasury. Some on the floor, some on the larger objects in the chamber. They had noticeably grown more at ease by this opportunity of respite, although still remaining in the bowels of ancient horror. Maria walked in casually and turned towards the group, who had stopped dead in their tracks. First was Lawrence, who was immediately forced through the door by an eager Luna who wanted a glance of her own. Her expression mimicked Lawrence on the spot as she saw the contents, mouth agape and eyes glistening in golden shimmers. "By the gods!" Lawrence marveled at his surroundings. The rest of the researchers shoved their way inside, only to react in the same manner, which halted further advances. "We're rich!" Luna shouted and shook Lawrence's shoulder. He smiled back, smitten by her jest, but remained entranced by the discovery to the degree he was thrown around limply in her grip. She quickly ran up to a stone altar flooded with ancient vases and tableware. "Have anything been touched?" Master Doris sneered detestfully towards a statue rendered into pieces underneath one of the deceased terrors. "Well, some could not be helped, but besides that, everything is as it was." She apologetically gestured towards the majority of the room that was not as tarnished. "Perhaps setting up shop here would be preferable, considering its seclusion and, well, as you can see for yourself, Master." Her attention quickly shifted when she saw Luna laying her hands on a mysterious chest. "Oh, be careful opening that, Luna," she warned as her fingers started to approach the lid crevice. Her black flowing ponytail remained faced towards her, not initially bothered by her concern. Eventually she turned, looking rather guilty, and without breaking eye contact, she clicked the chest open and flung the lid up. "What did you think was going to happen?" She smiled cheekily. "I don't know. Maybe it would have eaten you up. Ha! If that were the case, I would never open something without hitting it first. She replied, and turned her focus on examining the contents of the chest. And herein lies the bodies. German walked up to her and the other protectors, who had made room for the scholars by relocating to one of the chamber's less densely packed corners. Did you have any problem in here? Maria sat down on the steps leading up to a landing with a treasure-packed altar in between Vitus and Shepard. Nah, nothing special that you missed. She tipped down her tricone further as she stretched out. Her foot kicked against a bejeweled miniature that clambered to the floor, to which she awkwardly retracted her feet and sat back up straight with warm blush all over her face. German was the only one that chuckled openly. Good. How about you? Find anything back there? They took some samples from the bodies and Carol made some discoveries on the wall carvings. Which was? Well, this place is indeed Thumerian. She and the others have definitely confirmed as much. Not much that was instantly understood, though. She also believes the tombstone structures may not carry the same meaning as they would imply, but that's about it for now. He removed the folded handle from his back and sat down, leaning against a pillar in a spot not too cramped with treasure. Suppose we rest here long? Shepard, much like the rest, seemed to have already had his fill of the room's impressions. German snorted and looked about to the scholar's livid reaction. Let's see what they come up with. It was calm in the first chamber, so. Maria admired them in the process. How they walked around carefully, yet brimming with wild anticipation for everything that was to come. Naturally, it was a marvel for her as well, the mystery growing more and more intriguing to her, as she could not wait for them to establish safety in the halls. She was becoming more convinced that the Thumerians must once have been a highly cultural and intelligent people, judging by the intricate craftsmanship surrounding her. But whatever could make someone into what currently stalked the gloomy halls? Her eyes landed on Carol and remained on her. She was the only one so far that had found something comprehensible to do, sitting as she was, leaning over one of the stone altars in the alcoves along the left wall. She periodically stared straight in front of her at the wall and down to the paper arc she was writing on. Maria rose, stretched her arms and legs a bit before walking over to see the nature of Carol's work. Hello there. Hi. Doing good? This is really informative. She hummed while her eyes remained locked with the carved slab. Seems their imagery hold much more information than I can fathom as of now. There was a huge pattern on the slab, much like any other adornment that could be seen over the walls. But this was unique. Woven into the pattern of lines and images of figures, structures and flowing shapes were strange symbols randomly placed over a myriad of underlining straight horizontal lines. I am documenting the runes here. She pointed to the symbols. It is so different from their normal letters. I have never seen anything like it. So crude yet elegant. Simple but pure. I don't know. See here? She pointed to 4 runes, each in the edges of the frame. All the same, appearing as the depiction of a monumental shrine, an obelisk with curving lines that ended in a point at the bottom. I saw them before. I believe it may be the description of this place, since it is so frequent. But in the first chamber, it appeared different there. She indicated to the pointed bottom of the curving lines, where a vague and indistinct marking was. Here there is something else, but in the first chamber it was something resembling a face. A strange one. So far, we think it is a tomb, this place. Just like the stories. A catacomb, perhaps for their hierarchy. Wonder how big it actually is. What is this? Maria pointed out a conspicuous place where many of the lines converged into a framed depiction. Looks just like a cup. Carol hesitated with her notes to gawk at the little symbol. Oh, you're right. Wonder if it is important. I think it is the first room that actually looks like something. Do you have any references so far? Any sort of language? I am completely unaware. Oh, Master Osman would surely have more insight. Perhaps we should get more help on this. Maria looked around and found Master Doris still standing by the entrance, and managed to catch his attention by gesturing fervently enough. Carol could benefit from a second opinion in her work here. How about we see to organize this chamber properly? Agreed. Valar will be positively livid by this discovery. Master Doris, what of this statue? Karsten approached and pointed over to a statue of a robed woman with a pointed hood holding a lantern, situated behind the large gilded coffin. It was somewhat inconspicuous amidst the piles of valuables, and the faint violet glow of the lantern it held did not add particularly to its noticeability. It just occurred to me. It is identical to the one in the original chamber. Indeed, but... Well, there is this lever contraption. See? He motioned Master Doris closer to confirm. Perhaps it opens the door in the first chamber. Yes. I see why you would arrive at the conclusion. Is it not queer to place the contraption this far away? Most inconvenient, I would say. Well, should we not try? Hey, wait. Lawrence interjected. Is it truly wise to start activating contraptions? We have not even examined the entire chamber. Oh, I agree. We should examine it closely before touching it. There might even be hints in here that tell of its purpose. Right, but do allow us to stand before the gate, in case it opens and gods know what emerges. German involved himself in their speculations. Half of us speeds on over and explore the new path, while the rest stays put to help with the research equipment. Sounds fine? You hardly know it will open the gate, Lawrence argued, but he was given a smirking look from his friend. I have a gut notion that it will. I doubt they would make the spring of a trap this obvious. Then there are the similarities and the same glowing light. Very well, prove me wrong. Maria and Shepard with me. Vitus, Pius and Millard stay here. And just in case, activate it with precaution. Right, of course. If the door remains shut, we come right back. If a commotion occurs here. But, like I said. Alright. Good luck with you and let's go. Maria waved and walked towards the exitway, the boys short in tow. I'll accompany you. Lawrence walked hastily after. I'd like to be in the forefront for once. Not without me, you won't. Luna appeared as if summoned from the shadows to latch herself around Lauren's arm. They made their way back to the first crossroad, passing the now empty chamber and into the four-way hall. Tables had been arranged in the room with an array of excavation tools and sample gathering equipment. Students were still hauling packs of inventory through the doorway as they entered. Luna attempted to gain Master Willem's attention by waving. He stood with a notebook held limply in his hands, pen held to the pages, but unmoving. Before him lay the barred gate, and his attention seemed intently focused on the right statue, like deep in conversation with it. Great finds, Master. You'll want to set up further ahead, Luna said shammily as they approached. He blinked himself back from his dreaming and slowly turned his head in her direction. Oh, how so? The lights that the statues held shifted suddenly from murky violet to vibrant light blue, provoking a nearby student to jump back at the event. Here we go. German walked ahead of them towards the still closed grate. He shoved at it, felt around it and eventually discovered it to be a lifted variant. The bars vanished upward over the now open doorway. I see. I'll be sure to head on over, Willem remarked with his eyes fixed beyond the gateway, and remained so as they all passed him by, on their way through. The corridor was at first narrow, but subsequently opened up in a larger hall with lit chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The architecture was much more grand and polished, with tattered banners decorating the walls, accompanied with statues depicting hooded women with their faces entirely obscured. The long hall made a sharp turn to the right, where a double door awaited. It was expertly crafted in chiseled wood, giving the impression of housing something important. German hesitated before the grand entryway and threw a look over his shoulder before firmly laying his hands upon the wood to push it open. They entered into a round chamber with pillars lining the inner reach of the floor 6 feet from the wall. It created a sort of corridor that ran around the chamber, stone-bricked wall on one side, pillars on the other. As a whole, it was rather large, easily 20 yards across, with a high ceiling shaped into a dome. In the middle, among ancient armor parts and other debris from an older time, sat a large mound. Chains and other cloth-like texture covered it. The peak of the 16 feet mass was adorned with a whole nest of flickering candles that had long been dripping with wax over the mound. The placement of said candles seemed to suggest they have been over time added at random in the then still warm wax. German held out a halting arm towards Lawrence and Luna while he carefully approached the heap. I cannot see another door. Could this be a dead end? Lauren said while turned towards the outer walls. With her head turned towards the center mound, Luna began the first utterances of a distracted reply. The thing that silenced her was a head that turned up at them from under the cloth beneath the dripping white candle mass. A frightening and deformed head of a man with dark and sorrow-filled eyes. Then followed the ascendancy of an entire body having been huddled up, now standing atop two decrepit legs with an unproportionately large torso, akin to the other creature with its pale skin. Chains dangled as it stood. Bulbous fleshy growths protruded in places, and large, open, but not bleeding wounds were scattered over its form. From its chest hung entrails freely exposed. Where the left arm would be was a giant cannon that merged with the upper arm. On the left was a giant axe, similarly attached like the other. It gave the impression to have been a gross attempt at sculpting a person out of various things. The creature lifted the cannon and aimed it towards German. "Move!" He jumped head first out of the way of a deafening sound of a cannon firing that had the entire chamber shaking, and a fiery orb of metal hurled through the space. It impacted short of where Luna had stood, right next to the door. Lawrence had grabbed her, and now they both lay flat on the floor, but safe. The giant slowly and swaying lumbered towards where German had just stood back up and brought down its morbid axe. Maria ran up and managed in one single sweep slice at both the ankles of the giant. It became disinterested with German and instead started to shift its shape in her direction. Shepard entered the fray at her side and slammed down at the giant's axe arm. The blow had the arm explode with blood, bringing the giant to its knees. Shepard stepped back, looking briefly surprised at the damage he made, but in the same moment transformed the cutter and snared the arm with it to try and pull the disabled arm off entirely. But the giant recovered, apparently not entirely fazed by the ordeal, and with a still functioning axe arm, he pulled back. The giant yanked its arm and started to spin around. Shepard lost his grip, and while the cutter left his hands, the cannon came swinging back around, hitting him and sending him flying into a pillar. It now turned back to Maria and roared, bringing both axe and cannon down to crush her. She leapt backwards but stumbled and fell onto her back. She heard the characteristic sound of a blade hitting its handle. The scythe was brought up into the air and unsightly fast cut back down. A blow that seemed to only disturb the giant slightly, despite the bleeding. She rolled backwards onto her feet. The giant spun wildly around in an attempt to catch the thorn in its back. It faced German and shoved the cannon into the ground at his feet. From where she stood, she could hear a clicking sound. Then the ground exploded with fire, and another boom deafened the hall. Emerging from the dust cloud came German running. He stepped onto the cannon that was still thrust into the dirt ground, which brought him close enough to make an attack directly to the creature's face, before lunging over its shoulder and landing not far off from where Maria stood. This appeared to frustrate the giant greatly, as he slammed his arms into the ground with a roar as loud as the cannon. He started swinging with the axe as well as sweeping around with the cannon aimlessly. Both of them retreated behind the pillars, which the giant easily crushed in its outburst. In a brief exchange she looked at him, then turned with her eyes to signal behind him, before turning and running away from him along the wall, to which he darted the other way behind the pillars, as she indicated. The giant's head turned after her, and it plunged the cannon in between the pillars, trying to catch her. She jumped out and ducked into its side, quickly separating the rakuyo, and started swinging rapidly with both blades at the exposed ribcage. She just managed to dodge out of the way as the axe came swinging past her. It aimed the cannon straight at her, but German rushed in with a flashing uppercut swing across the cannon's arm's fleshy parts. It made the arm tremble and tilt upward. The cannon fired and she turned her head away from the blast. It impacted up on the ceiling. With an elegant step, German aimed another upward swing that lodged itself up inside the ribs. The scythe dug deep and the giant tensed up. He turned and with an impressive yank of the handle, pulled the scythe out of the giant, through both throat and the center ribcage. It was left open and blood sprayed out while it stood stiff. They stepped just out of the way as the mass slowly tumbled over onto its front. Maria remained in the aftermath with a hollowness that eventually allowed raw fear to take place. She had to sit down as the shaking became uncontrollable, looking at the horrific brute laying face down in the dirt. She argued it to be ridiculous that crippling terror would invade her only now. She had seen much already in the labyrinth. Her silent reasoning did not reassure her, however. German ran past her. It felt like she had been idling for hours when she turned her head to see him running up to the lying body of Shepard, whom Lawrence sat next to. She stumbled to her feet and walked over, still entranced and meek by the experience. German sprinted away and out from the chamber as she came up to them. Lawrence met her eyes. "Maria, are you all right?" "Yes." She looked down at Shepard's unconscious expression. "He'll live. Don't you worry." She slumped down next to him. In a moment's time, German returned with Master Valar and 2 other students quick on his heels. He pointed to Shepard and they rushed up, pulling out bandages as they came. Upon backing away to let them do their work, she caught sight of Luna on the opposite side of the chamber, before an altar. There were many thick stone slabs evenly placed along the walls of the chamber. She stood right in front of the one opposite to the entry. Maria walked over to see what had her so interested. Neatly placed on a red cloth, in between 2 lit candles, rested a golden chalice.
Thumeru Root Chalice. Root chalice that breaks multiple labyrinth seals. Root chalices used in rituals to break old labyrinth seals are said to change the labyrinth's form each time. The old labyrinth was carved out by the Sumerians, superhuman beings that are said to have unlocked the wisdom of the eldritch truth.